Hi. For this video, I want to share what I've learned about shading over the last 10 years of practicing pencil drawing. It might be difficult to see in images over a video, but my techniques have changed quite a bit as my familiarity with the medium has grown. Also, a huge thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. So, basic shading is essentially about pencil and pressure control. You could use an 8B pencil and get really dark values, but you could also get pretty light values with that pencil as well. Working with a single pencil like this is a pretty good place to start to really get familiar with the medium. It's also really important to practice this kind of shading before you start to manipulate it with tools like blending stumps and cotton wool. This understanding of applying graphite carefully with a lot of control is the foundation of good shading. And from here, it's a lot easier to grow and start to manipulate it, rather than if you just jump straight into using tools like cotton wool. It's very important to start and really practice this stage. Also, I think I should add, of course, art is subjective and there's no right way to shade. I find a lot of beauty in really simple mark making, but my personal exploration of realism has kind of led me down a path of manipulating graphite in a way to try and get the most realistic textures possible. And this often means that I almost remove the evidence of it being done by hand. This is why I then work into my shading with tools like blending stumps and cotton wool to try and smooth out the pencil marks and, in my opinion, achieve a bit of a higher level of realism. So basic shading was just the first step of understanding the medium. From here I started thinking of it more as something I could manipulate and move around once it was already on the page, rather than a mark that is set as soon as the pencil hits the paper. What I mean is basically I started using pencils to just put graphite on the paper to then manipulate it with a blending stump or some cotton wool to achieve textures that I couldn't achieve if I was just trying to apply graphite directly onto the page with a pencil. Working this way allowed me to achieve some really wonderfully soft and subtle textures. But I still found that blending stumps were more suited to finer details, and I was struggling to find a solution to get a soft shade over a large area or a really subtle tone shift over a large area. And so when I started working with cotton wool, this solved my problem completely. Cotton wool is amazing. It allowed me to get really smooth, soft tone shifts that the blending stumps and pencils just couldn't do. Something to add here as well is cotton wool has a way of desaturating your contrast. So you'll have this really beautiful dark tone, and as soon as you work over it with cotton wool and smooth your pencil work out, you're going to lose a lot of that contrast. So it's quite important to go over it a couple of times in layers to get that richness that you originally had or kind of tone that you're going for. Another downfall of using cotton wool this way is that it's a very clumsy tool. So you're not going to be able to get very fine details, and for those you're going to want to move back to your blending stumps, and you can work back into your cotton wool shading with a blending stump to get your fine details. And then another really nice trick, which I've spoken about before, is using stencils to create harsh lines into a soft shade with your cotton wool. And I don't think I'd be able to draw the way that I draw if I wasn't using stencils along with the cotton wool. Another trick I've learned with this technique of shading is a little bit counterintuitive, but to actually add your detail before you block out with cotton wool. This has the effect of softening the lines that you put down with your pencil or your blending stump. And especially with textures like skin, or if you're doing paws, or like just the creases in a hand or something. It has a tendency to make hands look really old or just overly wrinkled if you apply those creases afterwards, unless you're very, very careful. But being able to apply them first and move over it with cotton wool has a way of softening it and blending it to give it an almost like very subtle and natural look. So you're able to do things like add fingerprints and not have them come out as this stark contrast line, but rather this very subtle, natural looking line and tone. As I started to experiment more with this technique and using cotton wool, I started to use it almost like a paint and brush. I would file down or grind down my 9B graphite sticks and dip the cotton wool into the powder and apply that onto the paper. And I started to get tones that were far darker than I could get with my 8B pencil. So once you've applied your graphite powder, you can work back into it with a pencil or a blending stump to get a little bit of the finer details or finer shading. But a huge factor in this is being able to lift graphite back out with an eraser. So before I get into that, just a quick shout out from this video sponsor, Squarespace. It goes a really long way to help sustain this channel and keep creating these videos. But more importantly, Squarespace is a company I'm very happy to promote because I feel they can really help other artists and creatives looking to pursue a career in their field. It's so important to create an online portfolio to help people find you and to create a platform to make it easy for clients to get in touch with you. And for me, I just felt that Squarespace did that effortlessly. I never had to patch or upgrade anything. I could register a domain with them or set up an online store. And most importantly, I could design a portfolio and show my work the way that I wanted to. Also, every time I got stuck, their amazing support team helped me out instantly. So if you're looking at building a website, give Squarespace a try. And if you decide that you love it, use this offer code and get 10% off your first purchase. Okay, so back to lifting work out with erasers. Removing graphite is just as important as placing it down. There are so many textures I found that I couldn't achieve just from placing pencil on paper or even manipulating it with cotton wool and blending stumps. I had to be able to remove the graphite. I found that some highlights were just so much richer and they just had this blend that really only worked when I used a kneadable eraser to try and lift the graphite out. It's unbelievably effective, and it's very important to just experiment with this and familiarize yourself with removing graphite with a kneadable eraser. It's such a dynamic tool as well, so I use them all the time. And then also when it comes to rescuing tone that you might have applied incorrectly. So it's impossible that you're going to apply all of your graphite perfectly, and you need to be able to rely on your ability to work with a kneadable eraser to rescue tone or rescue highlights from that. A little trick I found was to use a flat surface like my table to kind of flatten out the eraser and then very gently tap and lift out graphite in an area to get a very smooth shade which might have been applied incorrectly. So practicing with kneadable erasers is essential. Lastly, just to share some of my thinking behind how I've approached drawing and working with graphite as a medium. I wasn't taught by anyone how to draw, and so I just kind of approached the medium more by figuring out what its limitations were. And so what I found was that graphite is a very light medium. It doesn't go as dark as charcoal or paint. So I try to always work in the most dynamic way as possible. I found that drawings that had really dark values would pop a lot more. They'd look a lot more realistic. I would mostly work with the darkest graphite and softest graphite that I could find. I also found that working with the softest graphite had a way of kind of preserving the paper. I was never pushing so hard that the paper's surface would be damaged, or at least I could work and rework into it quite a lot before the surface started to get damaged. So yeah, that's kind of how I've learned to work with graphite. I know a lot of artists work with the full range of pencils and they've got a system to get the exact tone with each pencil, and that's kind of how they gauge the tonal value. And I'm sure a lot of artists will disagree with how I'm working, or I'm missing out on something potentially. But this has just been my exploration of the medium, and this is how I work with it. So yeah, that's how I've been approaching shading over the last couple of years. I hope there was something helpful in this video. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see in the next one. And a huge thank you to everyone who's liked and subscribed and just helped grow this community. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.